I should say that my biases also come from the mostly museum, or cultural heritage generally, where one of the goals is always to engage people beyond the object or beyond that simple task in a kind of deeper understanding of the world and how it works. And I think one of the key issues is, and we've heard Chiara talking about the MicroPasts project and how they planned to measure right from the start, so it was built in right from the start. And we don't see enough of that. Sometimes it is a sort of unease with the privacy issues. It's a sense of, ethically you don't collect any information that you can't use, and people running projects with limited resources, or perhaps on a very project-funded basis where they've got one chance to build something and no chance to go back and update that afterwards. There's no point measuring things if you can't actually improve the project as a result. There's fundamentally two key factors for me that you can measure are productivity, which might just simply be how many tasks are completed per volunteer minute, and engagement. And one of the ways that I think about engagement is very museum-y. It's generic learning outcomes, which is things like skills development, attitudes, or changes in attitudes or values, enjoyment, inspiration, behavioural changes, and then changes in understanding and knowledge. And it's tricky with crowdsourcing projects because that can be both short-term and long-term. And the issue for museums and heritage projects is always that the long-term impact might be 10 years from now, someone goes back and starts a part-time degree studying something related to the project that had such an influence on their lives. It's very difficult to say that this exhibition or this project gave them an interest in archaeology and sent them back to school 10 years later, but it might actually have had that influence. So we tend to focus on the short-term measures, and I think it's one of the other gaps in terms of it's not easy to engage people who aren't present in projects, and it's not easy to measure those long-term impacts. But I think there's a large gap in the people who theoretically should be taking part in these projects. So we know that a lot of people might have studied a humanities-based subject at university, they didn't go on into academia, they didn't go on to higher study, they're still interested, but they don't have any outlet for that interest in their lives. And it might be that something like a crowdsourcing project is a way of them following that interest without having to dedicate their lives to academia. So there's always people that we're not hearing from. And again, with the museum background, thinking about the new audiences or the non-traditional audiences that we could be reaching and aren't reaching. So it's really easy to kind of go with the people that you know are going to be interested in your project. You might have to work harder to attract audiences who wouldn't think of themselves as having a relationship with their local heritage. And I think actually in archaeology we see a lot of those public engagement projects that can be really successful. And again, in the Citizen Humanities event that Stuart mentioned, there's a really great example of sort of local dig projects that again ran lots of surveys. They planned right from the start. They went to experts to get their input on how to run their evaluation. So they were able to throw out all kinds of really impressive stats and figures because they had that information and they planned to gather it right from the start. And I think generally there's the danger that we go for the easy stats, and particularly with online analytics, you can get loads and loads of numbers, and they look impressive and you can generate graphs really quickly. They don't necessarily tell you very much. They don't necessarily give you information you can act on. And that's partly because a lot of the online tools are designed for e-commerce systems. They're not designed for measuring engagement with archaeology or with cultural heritage. But we have just to be careful about avoiding the danger of going for the easy systems. But I'd like to see, as a sector, people sharing more ideas on how to measure, what does a really engaged visitor look like? What's a good, talking about benchmarking, like what's a good rate of people participating on forums or marking an object as being of interest versus people who could mark an object and sort of don't feel like it's something that they want to do or something where their input would be valued. A lot of my work has been working on trace ethnography, so looking at participant forums and looking at people talking about projects on social media and not on project forums, where we do see the crowd evaluating projects. Not just in a stark sense of I looked at this and I didn't think that it was very well done, but also comparing projects in really quite sophisticated language. So people who've worked on one or more crowdsourcing projects or other kinds of volunteering projects have developed their own ways of talking about things, and they can often be quite sophisticated. But then that raises the issue of privacy, and if we see people moving between different projects, and certainly with the Smithsonian project, a lot of their volunteers are very active on social media. So their social media accounts are tied to their real identities, so you know who they are. When we're evaluating these things, we have to be just have a clear stance on how far we want to go and how we're going to protect people's privacy. And I think that ties back to Dan's point as well. That's probably. Oh, I suppose the other thing is that a lot of the really deep signs of engagement are actually off project. So someone doing lots of tasks is a really great sign of engagement. Someone discussing their interesting findings on a forum. Someone who disappears off to read a book for an hour or reads 10 Wikipedia articles doesn't have any visible presence on the project. It's that kind of rabbit hole of really deep engagement that if one of your goals is engagement with the field, that's a huge marker of success, but it's completely invisible from the project interface. So sometimes the best marker of success might actually be that there's a tiny level of churn where people go off and learn more about the discipline while maybe keeping one foot in your project. So attrition isn't always a negative thing, but we really need to think about how we can explain that better and get a better shared understanding of what it means to lead your project and the different ways of leading.